900 hours on September 19th, a seemingly routine morning for Estonian radar operators took a dramatic turn when their screens suddenly lit up with 3 unauthorized contacts. A trio of Russian MiG-31 fighter jets had abruptly veered south, crossing into Estonian airspace near Vaindloo Island. Their transponders were off, their radios silent, but unbeknownst to the Russians, their every move had been meticulously tracked from the moment they left the runway at Petrovsk airbase. This brazen violation of Estonian sovereignty marked the beginning of a tense and extraordinary confrontation that would unfold in the skies above the Baltic. As the Russian jets penetrated 10 kilometers into NATO airspace, maintaining a lofty altitude of 30,000 feet, they believed themselves to be operating with impunity. Little did they know that their actions were about to trigger a response that would showcase the full might and coordination of the NATO alliance. For the citizens of Tallinn, Estonia's capital city, the day began like any other. The streets bustled with the usual morning traffic, the cafes filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. But high above, a deadly game of cat and mouse was unfolding, one that threatened to shatter the fragile peace of the Baltic region. The stakes could not have been higher. These Russian MiGs, each one a formidable weapon worth 500 million rubles, were not merely testing Estonia's defenses, they were probing the very fabric of NATO itself, gauging whether the alliance's commitment to collective defense, enshrined in the sacred text of Article 5, was a true promise or simply words on paper. As the gravity of the situation became clear, the gears of the NATO machine began to turn with a precision and efficiency that would leave the Russian pilots in awe. Undetected by the intruders, a pair of Italian F-35 fighter jets, part of NATO's Baltic air policing mission, were already maneuvering to intercept. These cutting-edge stealth aircraft, equipped with the most advanced sensors and avionics in the world, had the MiGs firmly in their digital sights. Employing the F-35's remarkable distributed aperture system, a suite of 6 infrared cameras providing 360-degree coverage, the Italian pilots could track the Russians with an ease that bordered on the supernatural. They watched the heat signatures of the MiG's twin Soloviev D-30 F-6 engines burning brightly against the cold blue of the Baltic sky, all while remaining completely invisible to the Russian radar. This technological asymmetry was just the beginning of the MiG's woes. As the Italian F-35s moved into position, a complex ballet of NATO assets was already working in harmony to spring the trap. To the east, a flight of Finnish F-18 Hornets deliberately maintained a visible presence on Russian radar screens, subtly herding the MiGs toward their fate. Meanwhile, high above the Baltic waters, Swedish Gripens ghosted silently, receiving a steady stream of targeting data from the F-35s via the ultra-secure Link 16 data link. In command centers across the region, NATO controllers orchestrated this intricate operation with a deft touch, coordinating the movements of fighters, surveillance aircraft, and ground-based radar systems. The Russian pilots, still believing themselves to be masters of the situation, were blissfully unaware that they had stumbled into a web of NATO's making. The first inkling of trouble came as the MiG's onboard threat receivers began to wail with increasing urgency. The pilots instinctively checked their 6 o'clock position, scanning the skies behind them for any sign of pursuit, but the Italian F-35s, with their radar cross-sections reduced to the size of a golf ball, remained frustratingly elusive. In the cockpits of the F-35s, the Italian pilots watched with a mix of professional focus and grim satisfaction as the Russian jets began to react to their unseen presence. The advanced electronic warfare suite of the F-35s, the ALQ-239 system, was already hard at work, flooding the airwaves with a barrage of false radar returns and digital chaff. To the increasingly confused MiG pilots, it appeared as if ghost contacts were appearing and disappearing at will, a maddening electronic mirage that made a mockery of their own radar screens. Realizing that something was amiss, the lead MiG pilot made a desperate gamble. With a sharp tug on his control stick, he sent his jet diving towards the wave tops below, hoping to shake his pursuers in the clutter of the sea surface. But the Italian F-35 pilot merely smiled, his AN APG-81 ACER radar effortlessly tracking the MiG's heat signature against the cold Baltic waters. The technological gap between the two aircraft was not a matter of years, but of generations. The F-35, a marvel of 21st century engineering, was more than a match for the MiG-31, a formidable but aging design that had first taken to the skies in the waning years of the Cold War. Undeterred, the MiG pilot pulled back on his stick, lighting his afterburners and his screaming climb toward the sanctuary of the stratosphere. This was the domain where the MiG-31, with its powerful radar and high-altitude performance, was meant to rule supreme. But even here, at the very edge of the Earth's atmosphere, there would be no escape from the F-35s. As the Russian jets clawed for altitude, the Swedish Gripens chose this moment to announce their presence. Screaming in from the south, their radar suddenly flaring to life, the Gripens joined the fray with an electronic roar that seemed to shake the very air. For the beleaguered MiG pilots, the realization that they were now caught between multiple adversaries began to dawn with a sickening certainty. The ensuing minutes were a blur of desperate maneuvers and increasingly frantic radio calls. The MiGs twisted and turned, trying in vain to shake their pursuers, but the Italian F-35s and Swedish Gripens, working in flawless coordination, matched them move for move. Data links hummed with a constant stream of information, allowing the NATO pilots to anticipate the Russians' every attempt at evasion. In a final desperate gambit, the MiG pilots turned their noses towards Tallinn, as if threatening to overfly the city in a show of defiance. But the NATO forces were ready. With a deft series of maneuvers, the Italian F-35s herded the Russians away from the Estonian capital, guiding them into the waiting arms of Polish F-16s and German Typhoons that had surged into the area from the west and south. It was a magnificent display of NATO solidarity and power. Fighters from Italy, Sweden, Poland, and Germany, working in concert with ground controllers and surveillance assets from across the alliance, had come together to face down the Russian challenge. The message was unmistakable. The Baltic skies belonged to NATO, and any incursion would be met with swift and overwhelming force. As the reality of their predicament sank in, the Russian pilots began to frantically assess their dwindling options. Fuel was now a critical concern. The high-speed maneuvering, the repeated punches into afterburner had drained their tanks at an alarming rate. Glances at fuel gauges revealed a grim truth. They were now flying on fumes. Their time in the air measured in minutes rather than hours. Faced with the prospect of a humiliating ejection over hostile territory, the lead MiG pilot finally broke his radio silence. Returning to base, he announced, his voice heavy with defeat. In the cockpits of the NATO fighters, a chorus of silent satisfaction greeted his words. The trap had been sprung, the message sent. But even as the MiGs turned tail and fled, the NATO forces refused to grant them the dignity of an unescorted retreat. Swedish Gripens, their targeting pods recording every moment in humiliating high definition, slid into close formation alongside the departing Russians. The MiG pilots, their heads hung low, could only endure the final indignity as their every move was documented for posterity. At the Polish border, the grim task of escorting the Russians home fell to a flight of F-16s from the Polish Air Force. These pilots, for whom the scars of Russian aggression ran deep, shadowed the MiGs with barely restrained glee. Their APG-68 radars remained locked on the retreating jets, the warning tones a constant reminder of NATO's technological and tactical superiority. As the MiGs finally limped back towards their base at Kaliningrad, fuel gauges hovering near empty, they received one final surprise. Instead of the hero's welcome they might have expected, they found themselves greeted by a wall of stone-faced NATO fighters, a silent rebuke to their failed mission. The implications of this encounter were far-reaching and profound. For Russia, it was a stark reminder that the days of unchallenged dominance in the Baltic region were over. NATO, with its cutting-edge technology, seamless coordination, and unwavering resolve, had demonstrated a mastery of the skies that could not be denied. For the people of the NATO nations, and especially for the citizens of Estonia who'd watched the drama unfold in their own backyard, the message was one of reassurance and hope. The alliance that had guaranteed their security and freedom for generations had once again proven its mettle in the face of Russian aggression. In the annals of aerial combat, the events of September 19th would come to be seen as a turning point, a moment when the balance of power in the skies over Europe shifted irrevocably. The age of stealth, of data links, and sensor fusion had arrived, and with it, a new era of NATO supremacy. As the dust settled and the adrenaline faded, the pilots and controllers who'd taken part in this extraordinary operation began to reflect on the magnitude of their achievement. They'd faced down a formidable adversary, demonstrating the power of teamwork, technology, and shared resolve. In doing so, they'd sent an unmistakable message to Moscow and to the world. The NATO alliance was stronger than ever, ready and willing to defend its members against any threat. In the days and weeks that followed, the story of the Baltic encounter would be told and retold, a cautionary tale for would-be aggressors and a source of pride for the men and women of NATO. The 21st century had brought with it new challenges, but also new opportunities. And as long as the alliance stood together, united in purpose and steadfast in its commitment to each other, no challenge would be too great to overcome. The Baltic Sea was quiet once again, but the echoes of that fateful day would linger long in the memory of those who'd been a part of it. A new chapter in the history of aerial warfare had been written, and NATO had emerged as the undisputed master of the skies. This is the story of that encounter, a tale of bravery, ingenuity, and the unbreakable bonds of alliance. This is the story of NATO's finest hour in the Baltic. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. We greatly appreciate a like and a subscription to our channel. See you again soon.